Hello. In my neighborhood, walking a bit, and I thought I'd talk about what I like to call the 60s epoch, because I think it's kind of reaching its zenith, I guess, or nadir, actually. These are fancy terms for its end. Um, and, it's, basically after the 50s, there was this counter-rebellion against the hyper-conservatism of the 50s that was done to safeguard us in the darkness after World War II and uncertain times as a result of it. Really, I think actually World War II kind of promulgated much of what we call the modern age, just out of its radicality and how much carnage it caused and uncertainty it caused. And it really was a war that I guess in some ways, you know, I would think we had to detach from it in some way just because it was so gratuitous, you know, and you really didn't know whether you were part of it or not as far as, like, risk of life, because civilians were randomly thrown down, like, through various bombings. But anyway, the 50s, namely in America, I guess I'm speaking Americentrically, was, it's on? Good, it's on. It caused, it caused a severe repressionism, I guess you could call it, as far as, expression and, schools of thought. There were plenty of, as one video on, like, David Hoffman's channel put it, there were all these, you know, unwritten rules that you were expected to know in your general everyday transactions and interactions with people and being around, and, like, you know, dress tidily in a certain way, otherwise people will judge you a certain way. Like, basically any slight show of deviation from what was the expected norm led you the risk of being accused of communism. And so that kind of was the main cause for the folly of the 50s. Now the 60s, which is the topic of this video, kind of promulgated, as a result of that promulgation of the 40s and reaction of the 50s, it promulgated our modern, severely secular culture as we have now and have had since the 60s. The 2000s, I guess, was sort of conserved, less secularized, I guess. But at the same time, actually, more so the 2000s were kind of a decade of disparity between the secular and fundamentalist religion. Religion had become very fundamentalist by then and kind of repressive and defensive, which religion, on most people's terms, you know, spiritual havens, are anything but that. They're meant to be refuges of courage and solace and hope, rather than, you know, despondent rule-abiding, you know, and judgment. And that's what it became by then, because the culture had become so secularized. As a result of this reaction, kind of led to instability. And I think with Trump's election in 2016, whether or not I like the man, whether or not most people like the man, I don't know actually anymore. I know he's controversial. I think it was a reaction against the sort of repressive secularism that had, or regressive leftism as it's called, that kind of developed when this secular culture was kind of left unchecked, continued to develop and propagate through the internet, and suddenly there was this intellectualization of it that became less soulful, less fluid, and more dogmatic. And this can be thought of as, like, you know, the SJW context, and also as far as cultural phenomena, there was this tendency toward postmodernism and this tendency toward, you know, crudeness, I guess, or sort of deeply set belief that popular culture could not be in synchrony or synonymity with high culture, and that high culture was the enemy of pop culture, and pop culture the enemy of high culture. And in fact, high culture tends to be hyper postmodern, and pop culture tends to, now at this point, like if you listen to the radio, like it hardly has any even tangentiality to what follows our daily lives as far as like serious life concerns. Just the vanities of like, you know, our iPhones and stuff, almost like 40-year-olds trying to sound hip, you know. And as a result, less people are tuning into the radio or calling it things on the radio synonymous with what they feel represents their era now, their youth. You know, it's just very tidy and kind of hip in a quantized way. Most people now, as far as the past 10 years, maybe in 5 years more so, including me, find much of their musical enjoyment, which is kind of what I was emphasizing, though I guess film could be thrown in. You know, the big blockbusters is like what's to be expected as the norm in theater now, in contrast with the more, you know, independent productions on Netflix, for instance, that actually have some artistic depth and aren't just about, you know, big monies in and out of the production. Considering that, yeah, I don't really think that the supposed mainstream is that much the mainstream now, because the culture is kind of fragmented, and the culture also, you know, it has these expectations of what's to be mainstream, because the secularization was given such high hopes and left unchecked, and it kind of has become, you know, indeed vain, like the fundamentalists suggested, and, you know, kind of vanilla, because it's no longer exciting. It's just like, there's no depth to it anymore. It had its context, and it wasn't, you know, adapted for a bit, I guess, in recent times. So, I call it the 60s epic because really the past 60 years, I mean, honestly, in many ways, the past 60 years, it seems so coherent historically. It's like you're supposed to put it together. Before 1960 seems a little timey, and indeed, I guess it kind of makes sense, like, visually, that I would think that, or that many others would think that way, because, like, you know, of course, we'd associate the color pictures away from the black and white pictures, and associate the colored pictures with now, and the black and white pictures as, you know, a darker, more lurid, more troglodyte time, you know, Philistine time. So, I think with Trump's election, with Brexit and the full European Union, or at least, you know, in many ways actually, then the, you know, the uncertainties of the West, so to speak, and this, you know, fervent social justice culture, which it was hardly that inherent to the culture as it is now 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, absolutely not. You know, the fall of Hollywood, and, you know, our distrust of the media, and the fragmentation of the media, and the Me Too movement, and, you know, all these episodes. It just shows a culture that I think at this point it's going for a real checkup. And I think as a result, it's going to shake a lot in this current period, 2018 or so, until it finds a new place to settle on, however, whether it lasts 60 years, 20 years, 12 years, or 90 years. I don't know yet. By the way, I think a good example of what I'm talking about as far as the 60s epoch, Joni Mitchell actually covered in an interview with CBC back in like 2010 or so. So check that out.